The Book of Remembrance of Enoch, Chapter 5, Tablet of Set, the story of Yatsekawd and Chavah. An account of the first personal contact of the Lord with man and of his instructions to them as to their conduct in Eden, and of their courtship and marriage. And now it came to pass that Enoch viewed Yaatsekawd while he was defining the elements of creation, and he viewed the trees and hills and streams, and yea, even all of creation, as they became living souls by the Spirit and presence of Motsah the Lamb entering into them. And also Enoch beheld Chavah, interpreting the meaning of that life which they received, so that they could all be joined together in the harmony of oneness in their function and purpose in the midst of creation. And as Enoch viewed these things, he became exceedingly curious as to just how our first parents viewed God. And he wondered what process they went through as they became aware of the living being of the Lord, and he desired to know what they thought about him in their minds. And he said, "How did my first parents think of you in Eden, O God? For I desire to know of these things, because it is certain that their innocence and pure view of you from Eden can be an example whereby the righteous among men can sanctify their hearts as they prepare themselves to return to Eden. And I know this because I beheld them in their perfect and sinless state as they looked across the way to behold you. And it came to pass that as Enoch pondered upon these things, he desired to see the matter once again. And he looked again with to behold his first parents in the days preceding their first meeting, and he saw them again, each one looking upon God. And when he beheld Yatsekawd looking, he saw him looking intently across a meadow. And Yatsekawd had cast his eyes on the other side, over against the bushes, near the trees where God was. And when Enoch saw this, he was able to see through the eyes of Yatsekawd and to discern his thoughts. And the presence of God was very strong and clear for Yatsekawd to see and to feel. And the Lord God did not have the appearance of a man in the eyes of Yatsekawd, but he had the visage of a spirit that was filled with light. And he could be seen plainly to be busily moving about near the forest, being engaged in what could only be thought to be important acts of life-giving love. And Enoch beheld it, and it came into his mind that our first parents viewed him only as the one who gives life to all things, and the one who fills all things with loving kindness. And they did not conceive of him as God, and neither the word God nor the concept of God entered into their minds, but a different awareness of him altogether dwelt in them. Now we know that all of our words referring to God have meaning, saying he is almighty and all-powerful, a sovereign, a ruler, the master, and the controller and judge of all mankind. But they had no reason to view the Lord God in these ways, for they could not comprehend anything that was almighty or all-powerful, because in Eden there was only perfect peace. And the need for power did not exist there, and the love of God was for them so whole and complete that they could not understand ideas of control, or of any ruling sovereign who gave commandments, for they had no inclinations to do anything contrary to his wishes or desires for them, nor could they understand any idea of an enemy who needed to conquer, and there was no need in Eden whatsoever for wrath or vengeance. But in Eden all that could be thought of in regards to life and all the world was the exceeding joy of the presence of great life-giving loving kindness. And it came to pass that as Enoch beheld this, he exclaimed to the Lord, "O Lord, I can see that my first parents did not view you as God, neither did they think of you as God, but they always and only thought of you as the giver of life and happiness. How is it, O Lord, that man first began to conceive of you as God?" And the Lord said, "It was not until the 7th generation, just before your day, that men began to view me as God. And such a view of me first sprang up among the wicked, for they desired in their wickedness that the one whom they worshipped should be all-powerful and almighty, so that by him they could destroy their enemies. And they wanted their God to be and to act like a supreme ruler who could command others, so that all should obey him with fear and trembling. And they wanted this so that they could extend their power over their fellows, and the wicked all moved together in one movement in their desires towards the idea of a God who could be looked upon as having the power to exact vengeance and one who could threaten others with the fear of suffering. And they cleaved unto one who would punish severely if he was not obeyed. And they did this because they wanted to use their God to overpower and subdue their enemies and to control their people. And you will see that it will come to pass that in the 12th generation a ruling sovereign will arise, being called forth and established by such desires. And the wicked will begin to view me as a severe ruler of men, and they shall name their God El, and they shall call him king, and attribute to him a kingdom. And now, my son, remember that your first parents were both children in the day I first brought them together, and since the day they became living souls until this day in which you are viewing them, all that was ever come before their faces was a wonderful view and awareness of my life-giving presence. And they encountered my presence in this way each and every day of their lives, insomuch that my loving kindness was all they could have ever known. And thus it was for them in their purity and innocence. And it came to pass that Enoch marveled over all that which he both saw and heard the Lord speak. And he was afraid that he may grieve the Lord, and he said, O Lord, have I corrupted my way? For all my days I have called you my Lord God. Does it displease you to be called God? And the Lord said, Be of comfort, my son, and do not shrink back to call me God, but always think of me as who I am, and always be found to teach the people the power of godliness. For the righteous can be like me, and I have 3 names. When Yaatsekawd beheld me across the meadow, as you have seen, he saw Kahee, the giver of life. And my name is also Anokeesed, for I am loving kindness. And your first parents came to know me as Motsah the Lamb, in the day they found their joys in my rich forgiveness, because I followed with them. And the righteous can thus be godly and be like me in all 3 of my names, insomuch that they can feel and act together in perfect harmony to bring knowledge and well-being with Kahee. And they can be filled with loving kindness, and they can follow my example as thus be like Anokeesed, so that loving kindness overflows out of them to fill every vision of holiness. And they can follow my example and freely forgive their fellow and lead virtuous lives in all of their yearnings and become like Motsah the Lamb. And thus you see, my son, that the 2 great decrees of creation are for the purpose of assuring that the power of godliness shall always dwell with all of the righteous. But the wicked who are the ungodly cannot be like me, or the God they know, for they cannot achieve being almighty or all-powerful or a supreme ruling sovereign. And they are called the ungodly because they cannot be like any God. And there will be those among the wicked who claim to know me, who will have a form of godliness, but deny the power which comes from being like me, in the fullness of righteousness and the power of godliness. So be comforted, my son, and see to it that all of the righteous walk in all of their ways in the power of godliness, and look to see carefully that the example I have set for the righteous in all 3 of my names is taught and becomes known to them, so that the power of godliness is thus set in the order of it. And it came to pass that Enoch marveled over all that he both saw and heard the Lord speak. And he looked, and he saw Chavah leaving the bank of the river, and she walked across a meadow toward the southwest, and she went up amidst the trees of an oak forest and over a large hill. And walking behind her came along Yatsekawd, and she would stop and look back to see if he was coming. And Yaatsekawd wondered if she was real, but he remembered the touch of his hand, and he continued on. And it came to pass that some distance away, Chavah came to a quiet place surrounded by large rocks, and in between these rocks was a hollow place. And here in this sheltered place, amidst the majesty of the large trees and rocks, she had gathered moss and made a place to sleep, and it was piled deep, and it was soft and warm, and the moss grew on the rocks in the shady places along the river. And it came to pass that as she approached, she sat herself down in the moss, and she looked about with expectant eyes. And close behind her was a fountain of pure water, issuing forth from beneath a very large stone, and the water of it spilled over, and it ran and joined itself to a small stream nearby. And as she sat and looked about, she could hear the footsteps of Yaatsekawd coming as he walked in the leaves of the forest. And it came to pass that when he espied her, she was the very picture of loveliness, And she sat upon the moss over against a large stone, with bubbling water at her side, and the shadows of the sunlight danced upon her with the movement of the trees. And the vision of it penetrated him to the center, and the sight of her dark hair and brown skin and white clothing against the gray rocks behind will never leave his memory. And nothing more wonderful could come before the eyes of any man, and he was struck with wonder. And he approached slowly and respectfully, and he sat himself down against a stone a little ways off, and neither of them uttered any word, but they just sat quietly and looked toward one another all the rest of that day. And when they awoke, they found each other to be where they had been the day before, and neither of them knew what to do with the other, and they would stir themselves and look at each other for a while, and then lie back and rest. And 3 days passed in this manner, and neither of them had moved from the place where they had first sat down, and they each were growing restless and wondered what to do. And finally on the 4th day, Chavah arose and she walked away, and about the time when Yaatsekawd thought he may want to follow after her, she could be heard singing softly, and her steps caused a rustling in the leaves. And when she arrived, she came over to where he was, and she gave him some green mint leaves to smell and a peach. And then she went over and she sat down again on the moss, and Yaatsekawd picked up her gifts, and he held them. And it came to pass that after a while he gently set them down, and he went away, and when he was out of sight, he ran all the way to the river. And when he returned, he brought her a yellow rose to smell and a stone from the river. And he laid them gently beside her, and he went over and sat down again in his place. And they still had not spoken any word to each other. And when the evening shadows began to fade, they were both where they had first sat down, and they both held the gifts they had received. And they both were wondering what to do, and in their hearts they were both speaking to the Lord. And as they did so, the forest began to get light, and after the light became brilliant, there in between them appeared the giver of life, who is the Lord, and neither of them seemed surprised to see him, but this time he was closer and clearer to see than ever before. And Yaatsekawd looked over at Chavah to see what she thought of the Lord appearing, and she said quietly, "I know him." And the both of them knew him well, being both raised up and nourished by him, and neither of them at first seemed to notice that this time his appearance was different. And Enoch was greatly moved to behold the purity and innocence of his first parents, and his love for them abounded. And I must say I was also much moved to behold this marvelous scene, and they appeared to me to be about 9 or 10 years old, albeit there was no time in Eden. And when the Lord appeared, he gently walked over and reached down. He took Yaatsekawd by the hand, and he led him over to be near to Chavah, and he bid him sit down right beside the moss. And then he spoke, and he said, "There is a word by which I am known, and the word is called my name. And the word by which I am called is Anokeesed, or that is to say, I am loving kindness. You each also have a word by which you are called." And looking toward Yaatsekawd, he said, "Your name is the first counselor and companion to creation, and you are called Yatsekawd." And pointing to Chavah, he said, "And she is the one who named you, because she is able to know the meaning of your life in the midst of creation." And taking Chavah by the hand, he said, "And your name is you are the dwelling place of those who are joined with me, and you shall declare the meaning of life, and you are the home of Yatsekawd. Therefore you are called Chavah, and I am the one who named you in the day that pleadings came before me to create Yaatsekawd. And the two of you are my children, and you are my dearly beloved." And he tenderly embraced them both with the power of his great presence, and they were encompassed about with eternal joy. And after saying these things, the Lord sat himself down, and he began to speak with them. And Enoch beheld that this was the first time the Lord had the appearance of a man in their sight. And as the Lord began to speak, Yaatsekawd and Chavah began to become aware of the visage and image of the Lord. And they both began to be filled with wonder to behold that the three of them all had the same form in their image. And Yaatsekawd looked at the hands of the Lord, and then looked at his own hands. And he felt them with his fingers. And Chavah looked at his face, and she touched her cheek beside her nose. And they looked at him and upon each other. And they both began to know they looked like Anokeesed. and that they were created in his image. And the light of his presence shone upon them, and in their hearts they together were drawn the more to cling to him, and his presence, and the feelings of kinship with him and with each other began to be magnified in their hearts, and the eternal newness of a day of Gamal came into the hearts of all three of them. And it came to pass that Enoch beheld this marvelous sight, and the Lord continued speaking to his children, and he said to Enoch, I could not appear to them in the image of a man until Eden was complete. And Eden was not complete until the two of them were come together, for it was not until all of the elements of Olam had been transformed into life that the souls of your first parents could become complete in each other. And I could not appear in the midst of creation in the image of a man until agency had intervened in such a way that all creation had the four spirits of life. And this is according to the decrees of creation, which say, the first decree of creation is that I can be a father to man in creation by the power of the intervention of the agency of my Son, who is in the flesh, as are all men. The second decree of creation is that all the doings of creation and all the affairs of man's salvation must be done by man through the power of the intervention of their agency. And it came to pass that Enoch beheld a great mystery, and the knowledge of it enabled the righteous of his day to establish a holy city. And except this mystery be understood, all attempts to bring Maween will be frustrated. And Enoch beheld that before Yaatsekawd and Chavah knew the name Anokeesed, they knew him as Kahee. And they thought of him with that name and with that feeling in their hearts, for they knew him as the giver of life. And then after they came together, and they heard that his name was Anokeesed, they thought of him by that name all of their days in Eden, until they repented and found the joys of forgiveness at their altar. And while they did not forget the name of Anokeesed, they most often, after that, called him Motsah the Lamb, because for them the joys of forgiveness overshadowed all they knew about their Creator. Reference number 66. Chavah was in the virtue clan. And they knew the Lord had three names, Kahee, Anokeesed, and Motsah the Lamb. And out of this came the concept that is, three in one. Kahee is the Holy Spirit, Anokeesed is the Father, and Motsah the Lamb is the Son. And they came to know him in this order, and all of their dealings with the Lord were to follow this pattern. And all of their relationships with their fellows also came in this sequence. Yea, even all of their thinking followed this way. And this order is the created way to know the Lord and to love one another. For first life is defined and given, then it is magnified by loving kindness, until it becomes full, and finally it is able to remain in the fullness of it by the joys of forgiveness. And this is the mystery Enoch beheld, and in this matter our first parents as children established the pattern that all mankind must follow in their knowing the Lord, and in loving each other, and in the living of their lives. Reference number 67. When we follow their example in this, we are being led by a little child. And that pattern is again, first, they must find and follow after the leadings of Kahee, the Holy Spirit. And the Spirit leads them to know Anokeesed, who is the loving kindness who created all things. And the loving kindness of the Creator beckons to them to come to Motsah the Lamb in humility and repentance, so that the Spirit may be restored and maintained once again for them when they repent. And thus we see that the doings of the Lord are one eternal round. And it came to pass that upon seeing this, Enoch determined in his heart that all the righteous should be taught to follow this pattern of knowing the Lord and living their daily lives, so that they could achieve the power of godliness. And ever after Enoch called the wicked who could not be like the Lord, the ungodly. And those who could be like the Lord he called the godly. And in this thing Enoch came to know for the first time that Motsah the Lamb was the Lord, in the form of a man in the temporal world. And he beheld the day of the coming of the Son of Man, and his heart leapt for joy, albeit he did not comprehend the full meaning of it. And it came to pass that after Enoch had thought upon these things, his joy became full, and in his heart he rejoiced to know this great mystery. And he found himself to be still viewing the Lord as he appeared to the children to speak to them. And after the Lord had told them their names, he said, I am come to visit with you this day, to bring you counsel and guidance. And you know that during all of your days, the spirit of my presence has always been with you, and it has never left you. And now that you are more fully come to walk together in the midst of creation, I am able to appear before you in the form of a man. And now you will be able to know more completely that we truly walk together as friends. And this is the desire of my heart, for I love you with all of my soul. And I shall continue to be an ever-present companion to you both. And I shall come to speak with you from time to time, to offer you counsel and to guide you in the way that you should go. And this day I am come to talk together with you so that you can become this day of one flesh, and walk all of your days hand in hand together. And you shall see everything together, and you shall know everything together, and you shall feel everything together, and you shall taste everything together. And looking toward Yaatsekawd, he said, and you shall now change in your dominion over the earth. For now it is your task to dress and keep all of the hosts of the living souls here, and your world is named Eden. And now at this day, all of the elements of creation know what they are, and they know their purpose. And they all also know the meaning of the life they have been given. And in their newness, they all love one another, and they all embrace the definition that they have been given in their creation. And know, my children, that as you are called to dress and keep Eden, it may not always be that the order of life that is here will remain the same. For all living souls can choose for themselves which way they will go. And all creation is made out of my love for you and none else. For you alone are created in my image, in both your body and your spirit. Therefore it is the duty of all of your souls in creation to diligently follow after the definition of every form they have taken because of you. And it is the duty of them all to walk in the harmony of oneness before you and their Creator. And all creation also has a new task this day. And their task from this, the day of your espousal, is to worship together with the two of you, and thus obey the desires of your heart. And they are to share with you all of the joys of your happiness, and they are to speak and sing of their joys in you before all of their fellows. And looking toward Chavah, he said, and you also shall have a new form of dominion over creation from this day onward, and that will be to continue to influence and guide all creation to love one another in oneness. And in addition to that, you are to bless them all, so that they will be in harmony in their obedience to the hopes and holy desires of your companion, Yatsekawd. For without your help, the task that has been given him cannot be accomplished. And how you are to bless creation, my daughter, is to cling to the purity and innocence of your heart and the richness of your charity. And it will be in this way that you shall preside over all of the feelings of creation, and the force of your charity shall be shed abroad like a beacon of strength, to overcome any perverse inclination that may arise in the midst of creation by way of the effects of agency. And your charity shall be a force exceedingly hard to push away, for all who may rebel against the definition and meaning of life that they have been given, and in this way your spirit shall bless the earth wherever you go. Reference number 6-8. In 1st Hagi, Tifora is said to have done this also. And it came to pass that as Enoch looked upon this wondrous scene, he began to look intently to see, for he knew he was beholding the conditions that could give rise to the beginnings of evils and their inception. And he beheld that the power of the charity of Chavah went forth to encompass the width and breadth of Eden, and it was strong, and any among creation who would wish to rebel against it could not penetrate it, and were ineffective to do so. And because she is the object of creation, how she felt, and her view and attitude toward the meaning of life was such that any contrary attitude or view must give way to that which sprang forth from the charity that issued from the purity of her heart. And it was in this way for any force in creation which felt contrary or rebellious, and they could not overcome the strength of her charity, to rebel against the desires of the Lord in the nature of their being. However, it came to pass that with the passage of their lives, there was one called Semahazah, who found that Chavah had an area in which she had no strength of feeling in her charity, and that was because she had not yet had an opportunity to be a mother, nor did she have any memory of a mother, and in her soul there was not yet resident the definition of mother, nor the meaning of motherhood. And this absence of definition was because Yatsekawd also did not have any memory of a mother. And upon seeing this lacking in her, Semahazah exploited the absence of her ability to cause her charity to preside over the feelings of motherhood. And it was in this way he found the means to rebel. And Enoch beheld that the evil one found that he could exalt his mother in spite of her waywardness, and he could dishonor the mothers of Abel in spite of their holiness, and in this way define them according to his choosing. And the charity feelings of Chavah were not there to inhibit him, and in this way Semahazah was able to have his view of motherhood preside over those who he sought to influence, and thus rebellion found a way to defy the dominion of our righteous and holy first parents. And thus we see that the very first departure away from the desires of the Lord came from a force that enticed some to dishonor their mother and father. And it came to pass that the Lord continued in his counsel to Yatsekawd and Chavah, and he said, "And I say unto you, that in this one thing you must be careful. You must see to it that you do not vary away or change in any of your relationships with the elements of creation in any manner that does not arise out of the nature and meaning of life that we have put in them. For such a change is rebellion, and it is to act contrary to the ways of holiness. And also know, my children, that if you vary away from the ways of holiness, all of the nature of creation will change in your sight, and your rich happiness will begin to leave you, and creation will be found to hold rebellions that will ever grow and enlarge themselves, and Eden will leave you, and you will feel stranded and alone. But enough of that for now. It is a very joyous thing that you both can walk together, each in the company of the other, and I can go together with you. And you can run on the hills, and you can play in the streams, and you can partake of all of the trees that have been planted here in Eden. And it is my desire that you multiply in your ability to have dominion over the earth, insomuch that you can enlarge upon the reason that all the souls in Eden have life, and enlarge also upon the meaning of it. And it is my will that you multiply all the good that is in your souls, and the love you have for one another and for me." And when he had said these words, he led Yatsekawd back to his place, and he said, "This is a good place for you to stay until I come again." And he departed. And it came to pass that they passed many days in the way the Lord advised them, and each morning they would arise from their resting places, and they would go hand in hand throughout Eden. And Yatsekawd would show Chavah the wondrous sights he had seen, and he would teach her the definitions that the Lord had for each of his many creations. And Chavah would teach Yatsekawd the meaning of all that was before him, and their joy was full, and their happiness to have each other knew no bounds. And the presence of the Lord followed with them always, and in their rich happiness they partook freely of the tree of life, and as they went about in Eden, and the fruit of it remained upon the tree. And it came to pass that they could feel that their task of dominion had changed, and for them having each other also seemed to change all of creation. And they could sense that they together were the objects of creation, and everything was new and exciting. And life for them became a grand adventure, and they shared together, and they came to learn how to speak to one another freely. And they also spoke to guide all the souls in creation. And it came to pass that one whole season of fruit passed by in this manner. And the peaches were ripe, and Chavah picked a peach, and she gave it to Yatsekawd, and they were hand in hand, walking back to the place where they stayed. And as they approached their resting places, they beheld a bright light ahead, and they knew Anokeesed had returned to speak to them. And in their excitement, they ran together to see him, and they sought to see who could run the fastest. And when they arrived there, on the ground by the mossy bed sat Anokeesed. And as they came up to him, they were laughing, and they were filled with joy. And the Lord arose and greeted them with kindness, and he reached out and he touched them both. And then he sat down with them, and he said, This day I have come to join the two of you together in marriage, as a man and his wife, and it will be the same for you as it is with the sweet little quails when they have families together in the spring, and who are always to be found living happily together. And do not be surprised that it should be so, for with man there is also a man and his rib, in rich companionship. And the Lord explained to Chavah that she was the rib of Yaatsekawd, or that is to say, the feelings of his heart made flesh. And he said that because they were the object of creation, they alone were created after this manner. And he showed them that none of the animals of the earth had a rib made flesh. And while animals could be of one spirit, they could not be of one flesh, like Yaatsekawd and Chavah were made to be. And upon hearing this, Yaatsekawd said, She is bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh, and we are made to dwell together forever. And we shall never depart away from one another, and I shall always be diligent that it should be so. And it came to pass that out of his great joy, a song burst forth out of his mouth, and they sang it together. Labe ein kole obe, kamal mara nefesh rakum, neda baya, kafshelakat, Zedeketelebab, tabele tan komai elel, beleya eradaf, kodesh imod, adam el ani, kava yamesha meni, yaona yadael, yaona hiloliel, lebe ankole obe. And it came to pass when they had finished the song, the Lord smiled upon them, and he said, You are my friends, and this day you are my only companions in the task that has been given me of my Father. And the two of you and I together have planted this garden that is called Eden. And I love you, and I have depended upon Yaatsekawd to invite me to enter into the elements of creation, to give them life, and to bring with me there your visions of holiness. And now all creation can be the abode of my love for man. And I have depended upon Chavah to allow oneness to affect creation and the spirit of friendship. And rich companionship now abounds here in this place. And their separateness is gone, and they each and every one can know one another and can love each one the other. And thus we have brought creation to another day of Gamal. And it is a day of rejoicing and celebration. And the day of Gamal for Eden is a day that is a day of a feast of a marriage. And the Lord arose, and he asked Yaatsekawd to sit himself down upon the moss on the glory side of Chavah, and he said, It is good that a woman does not sit upon a bed or bedding with another man until the day of her marriage, when she sits for the first time there with her husband. And Anokeesed reached over, and he gathered the hair of Yaatsekawd into one bunch, and he tied it with braided golden-colored grass that was twisted into 2 plies, and he tied the hair of Chavah into 2 bunches with 3-cornered grass of lustral waters. And he explained to them that the hair of Yaatsekawd was in 1 bunch, to show forth his days without Chavah. And he said the hair of Chavah was in 2 bunches, to show forth the days when she was separate from Yaatsekawd, when the two of them were not yet joined together as a man and his wife. And the Lord made a crown of the Kenneh reed, and he put Patishra flowers upon it. And I saw them to be blue, with 3 petals over and 2 petals under. And they stood up in a bunch upon a stem, and the flowers hung down around the crown. And the Lord put it upon the head of Chavah, and the flowers hanging down hid her smile. And he made another crown, and he put the yellow primrose upon it, and they stood upright and numbered 12. And he put the crown upon the head of Yaatsekawd, and the Lord looked upon them with the satisfaction of his pleasure. And it came to pass that he spoke tenderly to them of their love for one another, and he took them both by the hands, and he told them to put their trust in him, and to not be afraid, for he would always be near them. And he told them to call upon him often together, and to teach all creation to pray always, in their task of watch care over their children. And he opened up to them a view of their children, and he said they must be fruitful and multiply. And they did not know what to think, but Chavah remembered the faces that she saw, and she kept it in her heart. And when the Lord arose, and taking up a stone, He put red dust upon their cheeks, and he touched their feet to anoint them each one. And as he did so, he said, These feet shall no more walk alone or as separate flesh, but they shall walk together forevermore. And he touched their hands to anoint them also, and he said, These hands have found delights in the wonders of creation, but now they shall work together, and they shall pray together, and they shall bless together, and they shall praise together, and they shall learn together, and they shall sing together. And it came to pass that he bid them go and wash the feet of one another in the pool of the lustrial waters of the fountain beside Chavah. And afterwards Yatsekawd scooped up water with his hands, and Chavah drank it from his hands. And then she did the same, and they dried their hands and feet with soft grass tied in the middle. And then the Lord had them sit once again upon the moss, and he changed the hair of Yatsekawd from one bunch into two, and he used the grass ties from the hair of Chavah, and he changed the hair of Chavah into one bunch, and he tied it with the golden-colored grass. And after this the Lord sang a song, and it is a song of glory, that is heard to be sung by the host of heaven, when they behold the purity and holiness of youth, as they stand before the Holy One of heaven. And as he sang his song, Yatsekawd and Chavah each held the hands of the other, and they looked upon one another, and what exchanged between them is written only in the record of heaven. And when they had washed their hair, they had washed the red dust off. And after his song the Lord put white dust upon their foreheads, and at the corners of their mouths, and he said, We are now inseparably joined together in love and rich companionship. And from somewhere the Lord took flat bread, and upon it he put sweet fruit, in the form of a thick paste, and he rolled it up, and he gave it to them, and they fed one another. And when they were done, singing could be heard to resound softly from the trees, and rocks of Eden, and the fountain gushed up and ran over, and he went happily down the way with the news. And the Lord sat down, and he said to them tenderly and seriously, I am one who may instruct you for the days ahead, therefore listen carefully to my words. And take what I say into your hearts. There are those who dwell here with you, who one day will not love the life and purpose they have been given, and they will not find joy in what we have done here this day. And the day will come when they will try to persuade you to join with them in embracing a vision that is not one of holiness. So you must walk circumspectly all of your days as a man and his wife, in order to keep our Eden safe from their waywardness, and venture not into the ways of those who rebel against me. And as I viewed these sayings of the Lord, it seemed to me that they could not comprehend the meaning of his words. And it came to pass that after these things, the happiness of Yatsekawd and Chavah filled the earth, and they could always be seen walking together, in the purity of their souls before the Lord, and the joys of their living breathed life into all things anew. And creation felt a fulfillment it had never known before, and the tree of life prospered. And it came to pass that they walked in Eden for 7 more seasons of fruit before they sinned. And they would talk about the life that is in all things. And in this way, that life was affirmed and set firmly into the souls of Eden. And they took great delight in Anokeesed, and they walked with him, and his loving kindness was all that they had ever known. This concludes the book of Remembrance of Enoch, chapter 5. Shalom.